Hello, I'm Anthony. EQ is probably the most important insert effect in your songwriting and production arsenal. There are a bewildering number of EQ plugins available to you, and today I'm going to highlight 3 of them that I use on a very regular basis. I'm going to explain why that number's 3 and why it's perfectly reasonable to go beyond the 3, but there are good general principles why you want to stick to a small number of EQ plugins. And we're starting this discussion today with the FabFilter Pro-Q. This is number 1 on the list. In fact, it's number 1 on just about every list I could make about plugins. If I was only allowed to have a single insert plugin for my entire songwriting life, it would be the FabFilter Pro-Q3. This is by far the most important plugin that I own. It's my primary go-to tone shaping tool, and the reason why you want to find yourself a really good workhorse EQ plugin is that it helps you tame your piece of music to constrain each individual instrument into its own frequency band so that it's not muddying the others. I'm going to show you an example of the Pro-Q in use today, and we're going to have a look at these 3 EQ profiles that you can see on screen. So I've cycled an 8-bar section of this song that I wrote called Shades of Blue. Any pieces of music that I refer to today, I'll put links in the description below to the final song. But if I deactivate the solos on the guitar momentarily, we just listen to a section of this song. This is what the entire thing sounds like in context. Now I'm going to solo the guitars, the 3 guitar tracks that these EQs are sat on, and we'll just listen to this combination of 3 electric guitars all playing together. Now I'm going to remove each of the EQs to show you what it sounds like without any of them in the chain, and then we'll have a chat about what the Pro-Q in particular is bringing to the party. So there's no EQ there. You've got 3 separate guitar sections, all played on a similar part of the guitar neck, and so they're all treading on each other very slightly. And as you can see with these EQ profiles, I'm basically sculpting little areas for each of those sounds to live in. So the middle one is very dominant at 1 kHz, which means the other 2 guitar sounds are scooped at 1 kHz. I'm pulling away some of those sounds. A very good but massively oversimplistic general principle is that every instrument should occupy a completely exclusive frequency range. That should be the only thing that lives in that particular frequency range. Of course, that's completely impossible, and that's not what happens in the real world. But we use EQ profiling to basically help us get towards that utopian ideal. You're never going to get there, and you don't actually want to get all the way there. But these little EQ scoops with the guitars are kind of doing a little bit of it. Another really important thing that these modules are doing is pulling away unnecessary bass woof. When you just listen to the guitars on their own, they actually sound good. They sound full and rich and deep. When you put it into the context of the song, that's where the bass guitar and the drums, or some parts of the rhythm section, live. And so the guitars are stepping all over that. You want a clear, well-defined bass sound, and so I pretty aggressively scoop all of the guitars out of the way. They simply don't need to be there because the bass has this rich, full, quite elongated sound. All of this stuff is very basic EQ. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. The important point, though, is that the Pro-Q3 is the tool I've chosen to help me do these jobs, and I know the Pro-Q3 like the back of my hand. And that means when I want it to do a particular job, I can get there very, very quickly. This interface is just an absolute dream to use. As you can see, I'm adding additional EQ nodes. I can control them. I can see the overall shape of the EQ that I'm applying with these new nodes. Each one that's selected, I can control its Q or intensity very, very easily. The whole thing is just an absolute joy to use. Furthermore, the Pro-Q3 is actually dynamic. So each one of these controls, you can engage the dynamic mode. You can kind of think of it like a compressor or a limiter, where as it's playing, you can see it dynamically changing the the EQ profile depending on the amount of signal that it gets. Very, very powerful, really intuitive, very simple to use, and transparent when flat. If you don't have any nodes on your EQ curve and it's a horizontal line, then what goes in comes out. Transparency is another one of those really big deals when it comes to selecting your workhorse equalizer, because you're going to be putting it everywhere. You want it to be pretty low CPU, which the FabFilter stuff is, and not colouring the sound in any way. You're using it as a surgical tool. Now that's not the case for the next example. This is the TRS EQ81 by IK Multimedia, an emulation of the Neve 1081 preamp, originally released in 1972, but the thing's been going for years. It's one of the kind of industry staples. I can't afford real 1081s, I have to use the plugin, but this thing is actually fantastic. It sounds really warm and colourful, and this is the big contrast with the Pro-Q3, which is transparent and clean. The EQ81 isn't. It brings a character to the track that it's inserted on, even when the EQ is flat. Now, I predominantly use the EQ81 on vocals and guitars. The example I'm going to give you today is on a guitar track. In fact, we should listen to the track first. I've modified the song very slightly because it's actually a stereo guitar piece, but I've turned it mono. So we're just going to listen to the EQ in operation, and then I'll take it out of the mix and we'll see the difference between them.
This time she knows that no one's calling. Still she dares to whisper this could be the night.
I'll bring it back in now. It's called Airy Vocals for a reason. In fact, the EQ81 has a couple of presets in it that I really like. Airy Vocals is a very good one. Bright Times is another. So they're good kind of starting points. And then from there, I'll tweak it as required. But there's nothing wrong with having favorite presets in a plugin. In fact, I very often rely on presets to get me a good starting point from which I'll move on. But the beauty of using this particular EQ is that it's so quickly dialed into what I need. It's a 4-band parametric EQ. You have these kind of pairs of EQ controls, and it doesn't take very long, 10 minutes of reading the manual and tweaking with this thing to learn what all of the extra buttons do. You can switch between shelves and bells for the upper and lower range. You've got different kinds of cues, which is the intensity of the EQ bump that you get in the middle ranges. And like I say, within about 10 minutes, you've completely got to grips with what this thing is doing. And suddenly you've got this warm, characterful plugin that's giving you a different thing than your kind of generic workhorse, the Pro-Q3, the transparent workhorse. This isn't a workhorse at all. This is a thoroughbred. This is a particular tool to do a particular job. And that's to bring character and flavour to the track. So it's really a very different set of requirements than I'm asking from the Pro-Q3. An interesting thing about EQs that don't have graphical interfaces like this one, it actually requires you to use your ears more, which is no bad thing. I very often talk about using my eyes to back up what my ears are doing, and that's great. I truly believe that. And one of the reasons why I love the Pro-Q3 so much is because its interface is so good. You don't get that with the EQ81, so you have to use your ears, and that requires you to be far more careful about what you're doing. Now, having said that, I've set up a little test harness today to show you what the EQ is doing when it's flat. What's the difference between that and a track without the plugin at all? Well, we can see what the preamp's doing using a feature called Comparison Channels in Cubase. What I'm going to do now is play a version of that soloed guitar with the EQ preamp engaged, but the EQ off. So you can see, so the EQ81 preamp is on, but the entire EQ module is dead. So this is basically just passing through the preamp. And on the duplicated track, we have no instance of the plugin at all. If you can see one color superimposed over the other, those are the different frequencies. So I'll toggle backwards and forwards between these two tracks and you'll hear the preamp. a very subtle effect, but it's definitely there. It's definitely audible. This is one of those cases where you can use your eyes to kind of help you identify the frequencies or the kind of thing that you're looking for. With the preamp engaged, the sound is warmer. Effectively, all of the transients are just kind of controlled in a magical way. I don't think I've ever heard anybody adequately explain exactly what the Neve 1081 does, but you can hear it, and you can definitely hear it. That's with no EQ module plugged in at all. Then you add on the fact that you've got this very convenient, very intuitive 4-band EQ. It's just a really great tool. Pick the tool that you want that's going to help you do this job. A colourful EQ. I used kind of common knowledge. What are the world's most famous modules for doing these kinds of jobs? The Neve 1081 consistently gets listed in the answer to that question. And so I just found a plugin version that just kind of works for me. The third plugin that's a staple for me is another one by IK Multimedia, actually. This is the EQP1A. Now, you're going to find lots of emulations of both the Neve 1080 and this thing. This is the Pultec EQ. The P stands for Pultec. You'll see them in lots of different plugin suites. Pick the one that either you own, or if you own multiple of them, the one that works best for you. I'll look at doing a comparison of the various different models of these plugins at some point in the future. But anyway, at the moment I'm using the IK Multimedia Pultec, and this actually sits on my master bus. So if I drag my mixer across, there it is, the very, very last thing in the entire chain before we get to the stereo output. And the best way that I can describe this module is that it magically glues everything together. But effectively, this plugin just gives the song a hug. It just brings everything together and warms everything up. The Pultec controls are actually very idiosyncratic. You only have a couple of frequency ranges, low and high, and you have boost and attenuation controls for both of those regions. They don't operate on the same frequency range, so you can very famously set up the Pultec so that it's boosting and cutting at exactly the same place, and they don't cancel each other out. That's not how the Pultec works. Anyway, for this one, I've basically only got it doing anything explicit on the high frequencies, but once again, the entire signal is passing through this module, and it is colouring the entire sound. I'm going to use another comparison channel to demonstrate this, and what I've basically done is I've mastered the entire song to an audio file. So the one that you can hear master with EQP, that's the whole song including the Pultec. In the dynamic version of the song, I've just basically taken the Pultec away. So we can now listen to and compare, in both sonically and in the comparison graph, what the Pultec is doing right at the end of the mastered chain.
I think I might have failed again. The lazy mumbling, the paper-thin defense, the pencil drawing, the lines that never end, the dream unfolding to the fountainhead. But in the shadow of passers-by, I almost catch your eye. The night rolls on.
It's like throwing a blanket over the song when you take that thing away. It's kind of incredible.
A moment's peace of mind. I fly into the sun. I think I might have failed again. The lazy mumbling, the paper-thin defense, the pencil drawing, the lines that never end, the dream unfolding to the fountainhead.
I've meticulously volume matched all of the examples in this video today, so everything that you're hearing is tone. There's no difference in any of the volumes of the sounds that you heard with these effects on or off. The bottom line is to have a reason for doing the things that you do. I've demoed these 3 different EQ modules today because they all do different jobs. Now, I love a shiny new toy as much as the next person, so there's nothing stopping me occasionally dipping into my collection, picking out a different EQ and playing with it on a new song just to really find out what it does. That's absolutely fine. Keeping things fresh and interesting is a really important part of your workflow. But when you just want something that you know is going to work, these are my 3 EQs that I've settled on as targeted tools for specific jobs, and there's nothing like really understanding the tools that you use. It's much better to have one tool that you understand perfectly than 100 tools that you barely know how to use. Anyway, that'll do us for today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Please hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. There's Patreon and YouTube channel member links below for anybody who'd like to support me. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you again.